Hello and welcome back to the Fellowship of Beer. I'm Nick Smith. I am the Chief Beer Educator here at the Fellowship of Beer, and I'm also the co-founder and head brewer of Steam Machine Brewing Company. We have been talking about my favourite, it's a very self-centred video list this, isn't it? We've been talking about my favourite winter beers and the reasons that they work so well as a couple of tips on food pairing and cooking with beer. So here we are. We have covered imperial stouts. We've talked about doppelbocks. We talked about good quality pilsner lagers. And tonight we're going to talk about tripels. Sometimes you will see these beers referred to as triples. Sometimes you will see them referred to spelled tripel. It's much of a muchness. It's just in the language. A lot of people argue about where the name comes from. The first thing they point to is saying they just assume that it must be a Belgian naming system for strength of beers, and that's really what it has become. But there are differences between the styles. Dubbel, double, tripel, triple, quadruple, quadrupel. As you get higher up, the higher the strength. Now, the naming conventions of British beer is very well established and very well documented, and we have a lot of records from the 17 and 1800s of how British brewers were naming their beers. And various beers, as opposed to when their hopping ratios are changed or when their ABV is changed, they get different names. XX, XB, Triple X, KB, AK, and various letters that you would have to be the head brewer of a specific brewery in Victorian times to decipher the meaning. But generally speaking, the more X's on a barrel of beer denoted its highest strength. And that's where the theory comes from for the triple, that this was the strongest beer. This was the 3-star beers. What about quadrupels? We'll talk about that another time. So strong beers. This one is no different. It is 8%, usually about 7 to 9%. They tend to be golden beers. They all tend to have derived from some kind of Belgian pale ale. Now this one comes from Chimay. Chimay is, as we get bogged down into details, Chimay is a Trappist beer. So we have two different things to consider here. That not only is this a Belgian Tripel, a strong Belgian pale ale, it is also a Trappist beer. Now let's crack it open, have a taste, and then we can talk about Trappist beers. Belgian beers are often higher carbonated than British beers. And this is quite often, historically, because of Belgian yeast tends to dry out more than British yeast, especially after the age of industrialisation, when a lot of Brettanomyces and yeast strains in British breweries were cleaned up, whereas Belgian beers tend to have a mixed strain, or they tend to have more dominant strains with, unusual characteristics. But they do share a lot of similarities with British beers. Pours beautiful golden colour, a little bit hazy. Spicy on the nose, like estery, phenolic. Strong, you get that booze quality on the nose as well. And on the taste, more of the same. The hops are reasonably elegant. This isn't like a modern craft beer, an IPA loaded up with big passion fruit and tropical aromas. This has earthy, it has herbal, it has a little bit of floral, but mainly those hops just sit as bitterness in the background, and it lets the malt and it lets the yeast shine through in this beer. It's a high carbonation, and it has a lot of bubbles that are very refreshing. The reason I chose this as one of my winter beers is because of that boozy quality. This is a lovely beer if you're sat by the fire and you're just having a few with friends, or by yourself reading a good book and you don't want to be bloated. It's good to have a few strong beers to hand. Now, in my last video about lagers, about pilsners, we talked about the definition of macro beer. We're now going to talk about Trappist beer. Trappist beers are beers which are brewed usually by Cistercian monks. It has branched out more in recent times to other forms of Catholicism, but you know, we talk about macro beer. You can't get much more macro than the Catholic Church. But what differentiates it for most lovers of beer is the quality. The quality of this beer is exceptional. The quality of all Trappist beers are exceptional. You may also see the term Abbey beers being floated around. Abbey beers originate, you know, Belgium and Germany as well. And these are beers which have some connection to historic abbeys which were brewing beer. A lot of this got disturbed during the Napoleonic period and then further in the World Wars as well. So a lot of breweries, when they sprung up in the area, they started, you know, using either recipes, using inspiration from, brewing on the grounds, or using the name borrowed from an abbey. Some breweries, Trappist breweries like West Vleteren, Westermaal and Chimay, these were being brewed by genuine monks, and they were, you know, they were following the tenets of their faith, and they were putting the profits into community projects, charity projects, and the number one thing about what they were doing wasn't brewing beer. The number one thing they were doing was following their religion and worshipping their God, and the second thing was this was a secondary part of their life, and as I said, the profits went to feeding the poor or other nowadays more various community projects. When they saw that the names of their beers and the names of their traditions were being used by these big growing companies, these abbeys, you know, they kind of had their noses put out of joint. So they banded together and they formed the Trappist Association. So there's two different things you will quite often see. You will see something that, say, it belongs to the International Trappist Association, and you may also see something that says authentic Trappist product. Now, that's another mark for Trappist beers, these beers owned by these monks brewing these beer, which goes further. It's an authentic Trappist product. So they're saying, we brewed it within our walls, we donate this money to charity, and this is secondary to our faith. And that's because some of these have become slightly larger brewing operations in recent history, and, you know, quite often they've ended up outsourcing this as well. So this kind of goes a bit further and it's saying, look, this is made by bloody monks. You should drink this because monks made it. Whether that makes it a better beer or not, I'm not quite sure, because I've tried a lot of beautiful Belgian golden ales, and, you know, maybe the Catholicism makes it taste better. I don't know, but it's a beautiful beer nonetheless. Cheers. Now, tonight's food segment, it's not a pairing. Well, it is, but it's cooking with beer. We quite often cook with wine. Wine is called for in a lot of recipes, and it's become very commonplace in British cooking to cook with wine. You know, we see it on MasterChef, we see it on other programs, we see it in a lot of recipes, you know, splash of red wine in a bolognese, you know, white wine with some fish, and it's become, this is things which have come to us from France and from Italy and from Spain to a lesser extent, have come to the British Isles as we've become more connected in Europe. This obviously didn't age well for discussing this in recent history, but, you know, no politics. Cooking with beer is as old as, if not older. Beer is older than wine. It's more connected to the people. Now, if you want to cook with beer, a very easy way to start doing that is to sub out to any recipe that calls for white wine with a golden ale that doesn't have too much bitterness. And that's why a Belgian Tripel is so good, because there's enough sweetness there. It's not overpowered by the hops and the bitterness. Sometimes IPAs, they can be too heavy. They can concentrate down. You end up with a very bitter finish. That's not always appropriate. So using something like a golden ale, or even something like a German Hefeweizen, where there isn't too much hop character, can be really beneficial. As a very, very basic thing, if you were cooking with white wine for a chicken dish, try sub it with a golden ale. The dish I prepared was a home-cooked chicken pie. It was very basic. I'll hash out a rough recipe below, but basically it was just, you know, root vegetables, onion, garlic, a little bit of mustard, chicken, and a roux was made around this, like a flour and butter based sauce. Now, instead of using white wine or water, we used the Tripel beer here, and that still allows those nice delicate flavours of the mustard, of the chicken, and it complements the kind of creaminess of it. The pastry was a shortcrust pastry that I nabbed from our chef Rick at Steam Machine Brewing Company, Brewer's Pantry. He's a fantastic chef, and he makes beer pies all the time from various fillings. And this was a short crust pastry that had a bit of brown ale inside. And we cook with beer everywhere. It was not blind baked, it was just pressed down so that the bottom of the pastry didn't rise too much. The pastry was buttered, the filling was put in, and I just used a bit of stale brown sourdough that I crumbed on top, and then to stop that from burning, I sprinkled it with a bit more of the Belgian Tripel just to keep it moist as it baked in the oven. It's just served up with some simple vegetables. Just a nice tasting, easy winter pie. Any hearty food like that, if you want to experiment cooking with beer, I do recommend a drop of golden ale. We talked about in the last video matching intensities of food, intensities of flavours. This beer is not intense. It's a medium strength beer when it comes to flavour wise and focus, and that's why it works well with, you know, a pie that has a little bit of hint of smoky bacon, a little bit of mustard, the mushrooms, the creaminess from the beer and the butter and the flour all playing together. So that's why they work well together, not just cooking it, but they complement each other for the pairing as well. If you have any other food pairings for a tripel, we would love to hear them. Or if you have any recipes as well, things that you have cooked with strong golden beers, drop them in the links, drop them on the chats, and we'd love to hear them. Here at Fellowship of Beer, we love food. So it's good to talk about all those things. If you'd enjoyed this video, then please like, subscribe, leave a comment, say thanks, and it will allow us to continue doing wonderful free content like this. If you want to take your beer education a bit further, then check out our website, fellowshipofbeer.org, and look out for courses on there. There's various courses online at the moment, including free stuff as well. So thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again soon. Enjoy your winter beers. Cheers.